unstoppable project, and I am your host, Dr. David Hooper, and today I want to talk about something I've started calling grit reps. And this is something that's going to be so exciting for you because when I say grit reps, I'm not just talking about the gym, even though that's where the phrase came from for me. I'm talking about those moments where your mind starts looking for an exit before the work is actually done. Those moments where everything in you starts negotiating. The part of the session where your body is under pressure, your lungs are screaming, your head starts getting noisy, and some voice inside you starts saying things like, "That's enough. Ease off a bit. No one will know. You've still done a decent session. You've done a decent amount. You can always push harder next time." You know the types of things that your brain says to you in those moments. And those moments fascinate me, quite honestly, because I think those moments tell you a lot about yourself. It tells you what your standards really are. They tell you whether your comfort is running the show or whether your word means something once things stop feeling convenient. And it tells you whether you are building someone solid or just building an image of someone solid, like those Instagram warriors. And that's what I mean by grit reps. They are the moments that ask something deeper of you. And the reason I wanted to do this episode specifically is because when I look back at some of the biggest challenges and changes in my life, they weren't overcame or built through one big dramatic moment. They were built through repeated moments of staying with something when an older version of me would have backed away. That's happened in the gym. It's happened when I've been running. It's happened when I've tried to build businesses. And it's happened when I've rebuilt myself after some very dark chapters, which I know if you've listened to a few episodes, you have heard me talk about. So today I want to talk about grit reps properly. And I want to tell you where that phrase came from. I want to tell you why I think it matters so much. I want to take you into some specific moments in my own life where grit reps changed me. And I really want to make this useful for you, as I do every single week. So I think a lot of people are waiting for life-changing moments when the truth is their life is already full of those moments. We just don't recognize them. So let's get into this. So the phrase grit reps, it actually came from training. More specifically, it came from sessions where the real challenge was not just physical fatigue, but the negotiation that kicked off in my own head. Curved treadmill sessions are a perfect example, doing sprints or HIIT training. If you've ever used a curved treadmill, you'll probably already know this, but it keeps you honest very quickly. There's no coasting on it, there's no pretending. If you want speed, you have to create it. If you want intensity, you have to bring it. And once you get into a hard interval, it starts asking you real questions. Not just about fitness, not at all just about fitness, but about your intent, about your standards, about whether you are actually in control once it stops feeling good. I remember doing sessions on a curved treadmill. I'm lucky enough to have one at home, where I knew within seconds it was not going to be a comfortable session. The first interval's usually okay because you're fresh, you're open to the idea of enjoying the session. The trouble starts when that tiredness properly arrives. You know, your chest's working, your legs get heavy, you're breathing loud, you're grunting, and then your mind starts doing what it always does. It starts offering you clever ways out. Not just quitting, just almost softening the blow. So, go a little slower on this interval. Maybe instead of doing 20 seconds, do 15. Just go a little easier. Who will know? And I realized that those were the reps that really, really mattered. They're not the easiest of reps at the start, where, your body is feeling disciplined and your mindset is, right, this is a brand new day, let's be disciplined, let's get these reps done. Our mindset's pretty strong there. they're definitely not the reps I'm talking about. The reps I'm talking about are where that standard that you set gets tested. That's where the phrase grit reps came from, because those moments are not just about the output and hitting the target. It's more about the character you're building, the mental toughness, the resilience. And once I saw that in training, I started to see it everywhere. A grit rep is that email you don't want to send. It's the follow-up you are desperately trying to avoid. It's the hard conversation you've postponed and postponed and postponed. It's the day you nearly drift but manage to hang on to the diet, for example. It's the session you nearly half-arse and decide not to. It's the moment where comfort makes its case and you don't just accept it. They are all grit reps. And I just love that phrase because it makes grit practical. It stops grit being this big abstract thing that only belongs to elite athletes or soldiers or Marines or the kind of people who get turned into documentaries. It makes grit ordinary. And the other reason I really like this phrase is because I've always associated that word with how I go about my life. If I had to pick two words, they're always to describe myself, they're always unstoppable and grit. I imagine grit to be the stones in your knee when you fall over. I remember when I was younger, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I was playing tag in the playground at school on the tarmac, and an older kid tripped me up and I went flying and I skinned all of my face. And I had bits of grit and dirt and rocks in my face and in my skin, embedded in my face. At the time, it was awful, obviously, very painful. I was off school for quite a while as I recovered. But I always liked the feeling of overcoming and recovering from that type of thing. Do I want to skin my face again? No, definitely not. But getting up after I had fallen or been tripped, rubbing my face off, getting all the rocks off my face, the stones and the gravel, and wanting to keep playing is what happened. But the teachers took me inside and cleaned me up a bit. My mum had to come and get me, and like I say, I was in hospital and then off school for a while. But I just wanted to keep playing. I wanted to dust myself off and I wanted to keep playing with my friends. And that, to me, is grit from a young age. And that phrase, to me, it just makes this grit ordinary. And when it's ordinary, you can train it, you can observe it, you can repeat it. And I think all of those things really matter, because if something is trainable, then we can build it, we can fix it, we can get better at it, we can deal with it in a better way. So that really is the start of why this topic really matters to me. I know what life feels like when you're not doing these grit reps at all. I know what it feels like when you keep taking the softer option, often enough that your standards start collapsing without you fully noticing. And there was a period in my life where, as you all know, I've talked about it a lot of times, I was made redundant, I was clinically depressed, I'd gained around 70 to 80 pounds, I was officially morbidly obese and clinically medicated for depression. Redundant. And when I think about those times, one of the things that stands out most in that kind of moment is not just the external situation, but it's everything associated with it as well. The drift my life took, it was like it fell off a cliff. You know, I would say I was drifting, but it was more like I was crashing, falling, flipping down a hill. I was not leading myself very well. I was not interrupting bad patterns. I was not building self-trust. I was not holding the line I wanted to take. And I was not doing the grit reps. I was repeatedly making myself and life softer in the short term, but definitely harder in the long term. And that's the danger. Because every time you choose comfort in those little moments, you're training something. You're training yourself to negotiate with yourself. You're training yourself to be soft. You're training yourself to back away from the challenge. And over time, that becomes your identity. And when I say you're training yourself to become soft, I'm not talking about becoming a dick or arrogant or ego driven. What I'm talking about is letting yourself off the hook. And there's a difference between letting yourself off the hook and being kind to yourself. And honestly, the truth is, to be really kind to yourself, you get your grit reps in. You don't skip the gym. You don't cheat on your diet. You do chase your goals. You do chase your ambitions. You work on yourself. The soft version, or the you cheating on yourself, is when you don't do those grit reps. It's when you don't go to the gym and you put on weight and get depressed, or you don't do enough movement and lose your energy, and you become grumpy and irritable and affect those around you. And that is exactly what happened to me. Like I say, I was huge. And it wasn't just this one huge failure either. It was this repeated softness, this repeated lack of self-leadership. And that is why grit reps matter to me so much now, because they are the opposite of that drift. They are the moments where you refuse to let the easier option keep becoming the standard, quite honestly. And if you've ever lived on both sides of that line, you feel the difference very clearly. And I can vouch for that. I know what it feels like to be the version of me that lets too much slide. You know, I'll have the pizza, I'll have the chips, I'll have the beer. But I also know what it feels like to be the version of me that stays with it. I hit the gym, I keep to my diet, I chase my dreams. And those two people live very different lives, let me tell you. So let me tell you a little bit more about the real picture of this, because I don't want this episode sounding like just one long motivational paragraph. I want this to be kind of practical. And there's been plenty of days where I've walked into the gym, not feeling broken, not feeling dramatic, but just not quite as sharp, not kind of fully switched on or in the mood, head was a bit noisy and foggy, energy wasn't ideal. It was maybe one of those days where life has been a lot already and the session in front of me is the last thing that looks fun. But those are the sessions I've learned to respect the most, because they are the real sessions where those reps get done. When the music's right, your energy's high, and you feel like an absolute machine, it's great, isn't it, when you feel like that? But those aren't the sessions that reveal who you are. What is revealing is when you don't feel incredible and you still hold the standard. And that's where this grit reps come in. I've had sessions, like I said, on the curved treadmill where I've got into the second or third hard interval and that familiar negotiation kicks in. Similar on an assault bike, if you're doing HIIT training or if you're trying to push yourselves and add some muscle with weight. It isn't really panic or failure. It's just that internal bargaining. You know, your brain says, let's just calm it down. Let's just, bring the session to a close here. You could leave something in the tank and still tell yourself it was fine. And remember, those are the grit reps. Those are the key moments. Because in that moment, nobody else knows what's going on in your mind. And that to me is really cool. It's really exciting. From the outside, it just looks like cardio. You're getting it in there. But inside, it is an internal discussion on the standard that you hold. Do I stay with this? Do I back off? Do I keep the promise of the session or quietly lower it and sneak out? And that, my friends, is the real work. And those moments have done so much for me, because every time I stay with one properly, I leave with more than just a training effect. I leave with evidence that my comfort does not get the final say. Evidence that my standards are real when things get ugly. Evidence that I can keep my word even when my head is offering me easier options. And that matters a hell of a lot, because I know what it costs you when you don't have that evidence. You feel fucking shitty. It's an awful, awful feeling. But if you're turning up for yourself every day, getting your grit reps in, then that is where we want to be 95% of the time. The biggest grit reps in my life probably haven't even come in the gym. Yes, the gym helps build that mental toughness, but some of the biggest ones happened when I was trying to build my business, Lunala. So trying to build something meaningful with no real safety net behind me was full of grit reps. People sometimes talk about starting a business as though it's all excitement, vision, risk-taking, and big ambition. And sure, it could be some of that at times, but a lot of it, the majority of it, is much less glamorous. It really, really is. A lot of it's just following up when you feel exposed, doing social media when you hate getting your face out there. It's carrying pressure without any guarantee that it's going to pay off soon. A lot of it's doing ordinary, uncomfortable things repeatedly where there's not much external validation at all. And that was my reality. I was unemployed. I was on benefits, something called job seekers allowance. I was trying to believe in a future which didn't have much visible proof behind it. And it's those seasons where the grit reps looked like staying in the work when my confidence wasn't very high. The grit reps looked like sending the messages on LinkedIn, making the phone calls, doing the meetings, following up, showing up again, continuing when things seemed incredibly uncertain. That is grit too, and that's the really good stuff. In fact, I'd argue that some of the hardest grit reps in life aren't just physical at all. They're actually emotional or mental, especially staying with that uncertainty, staying with pressure and exposure, trusting the process when the result is still really, really silent. And that, to me, is an opportunity to grow, to learn, but also to help me realize that that grit just isn't loud. It's not chest beating, it's not performance, it's private. It's not what you see on Instagram. It's what you do when you feel exposed or under pressure or uncertain and very tempted to run away from this thing that matters. That's why I think the idea of grit reps is so useful outside of the gym. I think one of the reasons people miss these moments is because they are waiting for some huge breakthrough. We think life changes in massive cinematic moments, and sometimes it does. You know, maybe you win the lottery, for example. Most of the time, for most people, life changes through this repeated ordinary decisions that are not impressive enough at the time to feel important. That is what a grit rep is. They're almost these little hinge points where your response quietly shapes your identity. Whether it's the hard training session done properly, or that call made, or that standard held, or that moment where you don't back off. Doesn't look like much, but it is enough for your life to start changing. I think people miss this because we want dramatic proof. We want immediate validation from others. We want a breakthrough to feel like a breakthrough. But the truth in this is that the breakthrough often looks boring while you're in it. Now, if you imagine breaking something, you're tapping and tapping and tapping on the glass, then eventually it shatters. You're doing those taps every time. And every extra tap, the extra grit rep, you are getting closer to that breakthrough. And then eventually the window shatters and you're able to go through it. But keep that in mind when you are expecting a massive dramatic breakthrough. You've got to do the taps first. And that's been true in my life, certainly. Getting fitter took months through savage sessions, not just one. Doing ultra marathons didn't happen through just one training run. It all took time. Building a business didn't happen through one brave day. It was lots of them, to be honest. Still. And those things were built through these repeated grit reps. And that's just why that phrase and those moments are so important to what I do every single day, because they're the place where my identity gets built before the outcome becomes visible. So let's think about the 3 things that grit reps have taught me. And there's 3 key ones. So firstly, your mind negotiates way earlier than your actual limits. We've heard this before. The first moment you want comfort back is usually not the truth about how you are actually looking in terms of your limit. David Goggins says once you get to that point, you're at about 40%. So you've still got 60% left when you start to want to quit. Your mind's ready to give up, but your body is happy to continue. It's just the first moment that the work gets real enough for your mind to start lobbying for relief. You know, when you start to feel those grit reps, and that's really key as well, because a lot of people think about losing, for a lack of a better term, and they think that they're incapable. They lose because they obey this first negotiation, actually. And once you see that clearly, you can train a different response. Not recklessness, like I say, not ego, just a little more honesty. Number 2 is grit reps give you evidence, and evidence changes identity. This one's really, really important. You could tell yourself you're strong all day long, but it's very cheap. Self-talk is a little bit cheap for this one. What changes identity is evidence, action. That run you did and you held the pace, the standard you've kept, the interval you stayed with, the tasks you finished, the discomfort you handled without folding. That builds something in here, in your chest. And when you stack enough of that evidence, the way you start to see yourself starts to change as well. That is how I rebuilt a lot of trust in myself. And then number 3, grit reps matter because real life is full of negotiations too. And this is a lot bigger than fitness. Life is full of moments where you can back away, ease off, lower the standard, or keep going. If you never train that response anywhere, those moments will keep beating you. And that's why I love going to the gym and training and pushing myself as hard as I can. It gives me somewhere to practice those responses and to make them a bit more normalized. And then that response travels to different areas, not just your body, but it shows up in your work, in life, in your relationships, in moments that matter. If you're ready to build more grit in a useful way, here are 3 things I think you should try. Firstly, start spotting the negotiation on the spot. This is really key. Don't wait until you've already folded and then analyze it backwards or afterwards. Notice that moment when the negotiation starts. Notice when your mind begins offering you the softer option. That is a grit rep. That's the doorway we've been waiting for, and we need to walk through it. A lot of people don't even notice it. We just react to it, we give in, and we quit. Start noticing it. Number 2 is take 1 more honest rep. It doesn't have to be 10, just 1. 1 more interval done properly, 1 more difficult decision handled cleanly, 1 more time you kept your word, 1 more time you don't soften the standard. These are enough to start to build these grit reps, because 1 honest rep builds identity much faster than another hour of talking about what you want to become. Thirdly is let the discomfort mean something. If discomfort feels annoying or miserable, you will always want to escape it. But if discomfort means I'm building self-trust, I'm training responses, I'm becoming more solid, or I'm proving myself in ways that will help me in the future, that's the things to call grit reps and to be proud of those moments. Because I want the discomfort to have purpose. We don't want to just be discomforted or uncomfortable for no reason. And I think the other part of this is why this matters. Because if grit reps build you, then consistently avoiding them weakens you. Sounds blunt, but it is true. If every time you reach the negotiation point, you take the easier route, you are training yourself to do that all of the time. You're training that softness we've talked about. You're training conditional standards. You're training yourself to obey comfort. And over time, that creates a version of you that feels more negotiable, less solid, less trustworthy to yourself, all of the things we don't want. And again, I can only say that because I've lived it. That's exactly what adrift or even falling down a cliff looks like when it comes to your life. And that's why these little moments matter so much to me now, because they aren't little. They are votes. Votes for the person that you are becoming. So I really hope that this has made you feel hopeful and excited. And I love that word, hope, because it means you do not need some giant life overhaul to become stronger. You don't need a whole new personality. You don't need to suddenly become one of those people who feel superhuman every day. Of course, I'd love you to feel unstoppable. Of course I would. But you just need a different response in the moments that matter. And that is hopefulness. Because that is available today. In your next training session, in your next decision, in your next standard, in your next moment of discomfort. And there will be some. Let me promise you that. That is where you will change your life. Not somewhere far away, right here in your spot, getting your grit reps in. And that's why I think this idea is so powerful, and this is why it drives me, because it makes growth practical. So if there's one thing I want you to take from this episode, it's this. Grit reps are the moments where comfort makes its case and you do not just automatically agree with it. And those moments matter so much, a lot more even than you realize. Those moments, those grit reps, build self-trust, they build your standards, they build your identity, they build the kind of strength that shows up long after the session is over. For me, those reps have shown up in the gym, in running, in business, and in rebuilding myself after some really dark seasons. And that's why I respect those moments so much, and I look after them and I embrace them. I look for them as well. Whether I am in the gym or I'm at work or I'm making some tough decisions, I'm looking for the moment where your mind starts to negotiate you away from what matters. And that's where the real work begins. And that's often as well where the real change begins. If this episode's resonated with you, share it with one person who needs it. Remember to like and subscribe the podcast on Spotify and also on YouTube. You can connect with me on all of my social media platforms with @DrDavidHooper. And of course, until next time, stay unstoppable.